She sat at my dinner table, the table I've eaten at for 31 years, looked me dead in the eyes, and said, "You need to transfer $500,000 into my account by Friday, or you'll never see your son again." And I just smiled. Not because I was okay, not because it didn't hurt, but because she had no idea, none, that I had already seen this moment coming, and I had already built her exit.
Let me take you back to before all of this. Before the ultimatums, before the tears, before I had to make the hardest decision of my life as a mother. My name is Carol. I'm 53 years old. I live in a modest 4-bedroom home in suburban Ohio, the kind of neighborhood where people still wave to each other from their driveways and kids ride bikes until the streetlights come on. I raised 2 boys in that house. My youngest, Derek, still lives 40 minutes away. And my oldest, my heart, my firstborn, his name is Marcus. Marcus is 30 years old. He has his father's laugh and my stubbornness, which honestly is both a blessing and a curse. After my husband Raymond passed away from a heart attack 7 years ago, it was just me and my boys. And Marcus, he stepped up. He called every Sunday. He drove out to fix things around the house without being asked. He was the kind of son that other mothers would mention when they were bragging at church. I worked as an office manager for an insurance firm for 22 years. I wasn't rich, but Raymond had left a life insurance policy, and over the years I'd saved carefully, invested modestly, and paid off the house. I had roughly $800,000 in savings and retirement accounts. Not a fortune, but a lifetime of discipline. I tell you that because it matters later. Marcus started dating Vanessa about 2 years ago. He called me on a Tuesday night, and I remember he was practically giddy. He said, "Mom, I met somebody. And I really think she's the one." I was happy for him. I was. After everything we'd been through losing Raymond, seeing Marcus light up like that, it filled something in me I didn't even know was empty. The first time I met Vanessa, she was charming. Beautiful girl, tall, polished, very put together. She knew all the right things to say. Complimented my cooking, asked about Raymond's photos on the wall, held Marcus's hand the whole night. I thought, okay, maybe this is it for him. But something small nagged at me. Just a tiny thing. When I asked how her family was doing, she gave this very rehearsed answer. Like she'd practiced it. And her eyes, they didn't quite match her smile. But I told myself I was being a protective mother. I told myself to give her a chance. The red flags didn't come all at once. They never do they? They came quietly, one by one, like small cracks spreading across a wall. You don't notice the wall is about to fall until one day you're standing in the rubble. About 4 months into their relationship, Marcus mentioned casually that Vanessa had some credit card debt she was working through. Nothing alarming, we've all been there. But then 2 months later he mentioned he'd helped her with her car payment. And then her apartment rent was late because of a bank error. And then her phone got shut off. I didn't say anything. It wasn't my place yet. But I started paying closer attention. I noticed that every time I saw Vanessa, there was a new designer bag, new shoes, new something. Meanwhile, Marcus was working doubles at the engineering firm, coming home exhausted, telling me he was trying to get ahead. Then came the engagement. Marcus proposed on their 1-year anniversary. He called me the morning after, and he was so happy it almost broke my heart, because underneath the happiness I could hear something else. Something tired. He said Vanessa had already started planning the wedding and that she had her heart set on a venue that was, well, $65,000. I didn't say anything. I just said, "Whatever makes you both happy, sweetheart." But I hung up the phone and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I started asking gentle questions. Not accusations, just questions. I asked Marcus how things were going financially. He got a little defensive, which told me everything. I asked if they talked about a budget for the wedding. He said Vanessa felt it was important to have the wedding of her dreams. Her dreams. I asked once, just once, what Vanessa did for work. Marcus said she was between jobs but had some freelance consulting going on. I asked what kind of consulting. He said, "Mom, don't start." That was the first time my son and I had tension like that. And it shook me. I want to be clear about something. I was not trying to control Marcus. I was not a possessive, meddling mother. I had let that boy live his life, make his choices, fall down and get back up. But I am also not a fool. And something about Vanessa made the hair on the back of my neck stand up in a way I couldn't shake. So I did something I'm not entirely proud of, but I'll never apologize for. I hired a private investigator. His name was Frank. A retired cop, quiet, thorough. I told him what I needed and I paid him his retainer. He came back to me 3 weeks later with a folder that I still have in my fireproof safe to this day. What was in that folder? Vanessa had done this before. Not the exact same thing, but close enough to make my stomach drop. She'd been engaged twice previously. Both men were older, financially stable, or had family money. Both relationships had ended suddenly. One of the men had filed a small claims case against her for money she borrowed and never returned. It was settled out of court. The other had simply gone quiet, but his mother, according to Frank, who actually spoke to her, said that Vanessa had caused a complete rift in their family before disappearing. I sat with that information for 2 weeks. I didn't tell Marcus. Not yet. Because I knew if I told him then, with no proof he could see with his own eyes, he would defend her. He would accuse me of interfering. And I would lose him. So I waited. And I started quietly, carefully protecting myself. I moved my retirement accounts. I updated my will with my attorney. I made sure my name alone was on everything I owned. Then I planned a Sunday dinner. The dinner was supposed to be a regular family meal. Just me, Marcus, Vanessa, and Derek. Pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, the same meal I've made 100 times at that same table. I thought the conflict would come slowly. I thought maybe Vanessa would make a comment, or Marcus would bring something up. I did not expect what actually happened. We were about halfway through dinner. Derek was telling a story about his job. Marcus was laughing. Everything felt almost normal. And then Vanessa put down her fork. Just like that. Set it down deliberately. Looked at me with this very calm, very flat expression and said, "Carol, Marcus and I have been talking, and we need to have a serious conversation about the wedding fund." I felt the air in the room change. Derek stopped talking mid-sentence. I said, "Sure, what's on your mind?" And she actually said, "We're going to need you to transfer $500,000 into my personal account by Friday. For the wedding and for us to get started on our life together properly. You have the money. It makes sense for you to invest in your son's future." The table went completely silent. Derek looked at me with his mouth open. Marcus, and this is the part that hurt the most, Marcus was looking at his plate. He wasn't shocked. He had known this was coming. My own son had sat there while his fiancée demanded half my life savings, and he said nothing. I felt it like a physical blow. Not from Vanessa, she was who she was, I'd already figured that out. But from Marcus. From my boy. I took a slow breath. And then I said very calmly, "That's an interesting request, Vanessa." She must have taken my calm as agreement. Because she nodded and started talking about the wedding venue, about a honeymoon to Italy, about a down payment on a house. All already planned out. All already priced. The numbers totaled. I did the math later, over $600,000. Derek stood up from the table. "I'll never forget this," he said. "I'm sorry I have to step outside." Because he knew if he stayed in that room, he was going to say something that couldn't be taken back. I looked at Marcus. And I said quietly, "Did you know she was going to ask me this tonight?" He finally looked up. And he said, "Mom, it's not like she's asking you for nothing. It's for our future." There it was. That was the moment I realized the Marcus I thought I knew, the boy who drove out to fix my gutters without being asked, who called every Sunday, who held my hand at his father's funeral, that Marcus had slowly, carefully been replaced by someone I didn't recognize. Someone who could sit at my table and watch his mother get shaken down and call it investing in his future. I don't know how I stayed as calm as I did. 30 years of life experience, maybe? Or maybe because I had already prepared for this exact moment. I said, "Let me think about it." Vanessa smiled, this very satisfied, victorious smile, and said, "Of course. But Friday is important. We have deposits due." And I nodded. And I cleared the dishes. That night, after they left, I sat alone in my kitchen until almost 2 in the morning. I cried. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. I cried for Marcus, for the boy he was and the man he was becoming. I cried for Raymond because I kept thinking, what would you do? What would you tell me right now? I cried because the loneliness of that moment was suffocating. My oldest son had looked at me with empty eyes while someone demanded my life savings, and he'd called it a future. I called my sister Paulette in the morning. Paulette is 61, and she does not sugarcoat anything. I told her everything. There was a long silence, and then she said, "Carol, you know what you have to do." I did know. But knowing and doing are two entirely different things when your heart is involved. Here's what nobody tells you about loving your children. Sometimes loving them means doing the thing that will make them hate you for a while. Sometimes protecting someone means stepping in front of them even when they're running straight at you. I thought about how many mothers had sat in this exact position. How many women had handed over their security, their savings, their dignity, because they were afraid of losing their child. And I thought about how many of them ended up with nothing. No money, no respect, and still no relationship with their kid. I was not going to be that woman. I called my attorney, Linda, on Monday morning. I'd already spoken to her weeks earlier about protecting my accounts, but now I told her the full picture. She listened carefully and then she said, "Carol, I think it's time to activate what we discussed." Yes. It was. What Vanessa didn't know, what Marcus didn't know, was that 3 weeks before that dinner, after I got Frank's report, I had already taken a series of very deliberate steps. My savings and retirement accounts had been restructured into a trust. A trust that I controlled, that could not be accessed by anyone else, and that was built with very specific language around what constituted a valid request for distribution. In plain English, nobody could pressure me or guilt me or legally maneuver their way into my money. It was protected. But I didn't stop there. I also had Linda draft a very specific document, a family loan agreement, with terms, interest, a repayment schedule, and legal enforcement clauses. It was for $50,000. Not $500,000. 50. For a reasonable wedding contribution from a mother. The kind of number that was generous but not life-altering. The kind of number that a financially stable couple wouldn't need to argue over. The agreement also contained a clause, and this is the part that Linda was particularly proud of, that stipulated if the marriage did not occur, or if the funds were used for anything other than documented wedding expenses, the full amount was immediately due with interest. On Wednesday, 2 days before Vanessa's Friday deadline, I called Marcus and asked him to come over alone. He hesitated and I said, "Please, Marcus. Just you." He came over Thursday evening. He sat across from me at the same table. And I told him everything. Not with anger. Not with accusations. I told him as his mother, looking him in the eyes, that I loved him more than anything on this earth. And because I loved him, I was going to tell him some things that were going to be very hard to hear. I showed him Frank's report. Every page. The previous engagements. The borrowed money. The court case. The other mother's account. Marcus didn't say anything for a long time. His jaw was tight. I could see him fighting it, the part of him that wanted to defend her, that wanted to believe what he built was real. Then he said, "She told me those were misunderstandings. That the other guys were controlling." I said, "Maybe they were, sweetheart. But does this look like misunderstandings to you?" He looked at the pages again. And then I slid the loan agreement across the table. I said, "This is what I'm prepared to offer. $50,000 documented toward a real wedding. If Vanessa loves you, truly loves you, $50,000 for a wedding is more than enough. And she'll sign this without a second thought. Marcus looked at the document. Looked at me. And I watched something shift behind his eyes. He said very quietly, "She's not going to sign this." I said, "I know." Marcus confronted Vanessa that night. He called me at 11:30, and I could tell from his voice that it had not gone well. Apparently, when he presented the $50,000 offer with the legal agreement, Vanessa's reaction was immediate and explosive. She said it was insulting. She said I was controlling and jealous and trying to sabotage their happiness. She said if he couldn't stand up to his mother and get them the money they needed, then maybe he wasn't the man she thought he was. And Marcus told me this part very slowly, like he still couldn't believe it. She told him that she had already spoken to a family attorney about what she might be entitled to if they married and later divorced. She had been researching Ohio marital property laws before they were even married. Marcus said there was a long silence in the room after she said it, and then he picked up his keys and walked out. He filed to officially break the engagement the following week. And it didn't stop there. The universe has its own way of closing loops. About a month after the breakup, my neighbor Janet, who is the world's most reliable source of local information, told me that Vanessa had been telling people in the area that Marcus had abandoned her and that his controlling mother had broken up the relationship. She was apparently already seeing someone new. An older gentleman, recently widowed, very comfortable financially. I made one phone call. To Frank. Frank made one phone call to the right person, a mutual connection of that widowed gentleman's grown daughter. Within a week, that family had the same folder I had. I never spoke to them. I never got involved. I simply made sure the truth had a path to travel. I heard later that that relationship ended very quickly. Karma doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it comes like a quiet word passed to the right person at the right time. It has been 11 months since that Sunday dinner. Marcus and I had a long, painful, honest process of rebuilding. He was angry for a while, not at me, exactly, but at himself. At the time he'd lost. At the ways he'd let himself be steered away from who he was. We had conversations that Raymond should have been there for. We cried together. We made our way back to each other slowly, the way you do when something real has been broken and you're committed to the repair. He calls every Sunday again. Last month he came over and fixed the fence in the backyard that had been leaning for 2 years. He stayed for dinner. We watched old home videos of him and Derek as kids, and we laughed until we couldn't breathe. That kitchen table, the same one where a woman sat and demanded my life savings with a smile on her face, that table is still standing. And so am I. My money is still in that trust. Fully protected. Every cent I earned and every cent Raymond left behind is exactly where it belongs. And Vanessa? Last I heard, she'd moved to a different city. Starting over, I imagine. Looking for the next table to sit down at. Here's what I want to leave you with, because I've thought about this a lot in the past year. The moment I got Frank's report, I had a choice. I could have panicked. I could have confronted Marcus immediately, and pushed him away. I could have said nothing and hoped it would work itself out. Or I could have just written the check, bought myself temporary peace, and called it love. I chose none of those things. I chose to be quiet, strategic, and prepared. I chose to protect my son not by controlling him, but by giving him the truth and letting him choose. I chose to protect myself not out of greed but out of self-respect. And I want to say this to every parent watching, every mother, every father who has ever watched someone slowly pull their child away from them. Your love is not measured by what you hand over. Your love is not proven by your silence. Real love sometimes looks like a legal document and a folder of uncomfortable facts. Real love sometimes looks like holding your ground at a dinner table while your heart is breaking. You built your life. You earned your peace. You are allowed to protect it. And if someone mistakes your kindness for weakness, if they sit at your table and think they can look you in the eyes and take what is yours, Let them smile. Because you already built their exit. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needed to hear it today. And if you've ever had to protect yourself from someone you were supposed to be able to trust, drop a comment below. You are not alone. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.